Hi, everyone. Today, what we're going to do, following our recap, we'll turn our attention to the subtopic of gender in reference to culture. So, to begin, we'll break down gender and what it means and how we use it within sociology. And then we'll get into your reading for today and kind of tie the reading into the fourth and class assignment. So, to briefly recap, last class we got into culture and leisure. And so when looking at the relationship between culture and leisure, what you see in the United States is our culture tends to, de-emphasize the significance of leisure. And as a result, what it does is really stress the importance of work. And we see that in the US, and it's reflected in a lot of different things, as we talked about being one of the only countries in the world that doesn't give our citizens, required time off work. You can look at how often people will take sick days, when they're sick. Again, United States, we're afraid to miss work. In other countries, if people are sick, they simply, won't go. So you kind of see this being part of our culture and society, formally speaking, but also informally, how we tend to just, really focus on, work, work, work. And then, what we kind of are left with is not really paying too much attention to leisure and also the benefits that come with leisure. But again, that changes from one culture to another. Or some cultures, you have a better balance of the two. In other cultures, they de-emphasize, put lower importance on work, and then tend to emphasize and really stress the significance of leisure. So that's what we looked at with the reading. And then for the in-class assignments, what I wanted you to do is kind of look at this question of why we are different in the sense that the culture is so strongly centered on work that we tend to by default really marginalize leisure. And basically getting down to the bottom of that question is why do we do this? We do it because we're born into and we're socialized in a culture that kind of makes us that way. So, in other words, if you go back to that study with the adolescents in the US and the adolescents in Holland, they're not born differently. We don't have different genetics that make us prefer, work or leisure. Rather, the difference is created through different types of socialization. One form of socialization that really says work, work, work. Another form of socialization that really says, leisure, leisure, play. So, with that being said, the other thing I wanted you to get into for this in-class assignment was, with the pandemic currently, do you think people are starting to recognize the benefits of leisure? In other words, because, a lot of our leisure opportunities have been taken away, perhaps, or it has changed significantly. Do you think we kind of start to realize once it's gone, how valuable it is? So I think as a whole, people have started to kind of take that approach where, you don't know how good you have it until it's gone. And a lot of that kind of ties into the leisure and the kind of positive results that we got from our leisure. And you take that away, life and the quality of moments of life is changed dramatically. And so, definitely, I don't know personally if you've experienced that, but I know personally, and I just hear in general that a lot of people kind of, one of the things get back to normal, really going to appreciate these moments more rather than simply taking them for granted. And when things get back to normal, you probably start to see, mental health in terms of quality of one's mental health life increasing as a result because we get back to kind of our leisure activities and getting back to the benefits of those activities. Again, benefits we usually take for granted, but now maybe we can appreciate a little bit more. So getting into the subtopic of gender, we're going to first have to distinguish two concepts from one another. First, we're going to talk about sex, and then we'll talk about gender. So in sociology, we use the word gender differently than it's often used in kind of everyday discourse. So usually in everyday discourse, when people say gender, they're referring to uh, the biological male or female. In sociology, we don't use it in the same way. So in sociology, when we say sex, we're referring to the biological male and biological female. In sociology, when we say the word gender, we're talking about ideas of maleness, ideas of femaleness that we associate with the sexes. So typically, these ideas of femaleness are referred to as femininity, and the ideas of maleness is referred to or are referred to as masculinity. So when we talk about gender, it's separate than sex. You know, sex is kind of the biological person, male or female, and gender means the expectations that we have associated with one sex, the expectations of masculinity and femininity. Those expectations capture the meaning of gender and how we use it in sociology. So, with that understanding, we can say that gender is something fluid. The meanings we associate with the sexes change over time, and they change from place to place. So, one example, we would define, women as strictly kind of homemakers, and wouldn't see them as, business leaders, wouldn't see them as, college students in the past. But today, when you think of a college student, when you think of a business leader, that's, becoming more gender neutral. That gets into the next part here. When we say gender neutral, we're talking about aspects of culture and that we associate with people rather than aspects of culture we associate more with one sex or the other. So again, gender is fluid. It changes over place. It changes over time and from place to place. We have our gendered meanings here, but in different cultures, they define the sexes differently. So that's what we're looking at when we talk about gender. And one other key aspect to gender in sociology, it's not something that you have. It's not inborn, it's not innate, but rather it's a performance. It's something that you have to do. So through socialization, as we'll get into on our next slide, we learn these ideas of femaleness. We learn the ideas of maleness, and then we start to do the gender. And so we can say two things are going on at once. You try to not do, the other gender. So, boys often, when learning a gendered identity, not only try to perform masculinity, but they try to distance themselves from femininity. And, the same thing with girls learning femininity for the first time. Often, girls will practice their femininity, do femininity, and at the same time, they'll try to distance themselves from anything associated with boys, anything associated with masculinity. So again, all this is very contextual as well. You perform your gender differently in different contexts and different spaces. And so again, it's something very fluid. It's not inborn, but it's a performance. And as a performance, we see overall gender becomes an achievement. So to be seen kind of as a real man or as a real woman, through the lens of our culture, you have to give the proper gender performances. So again, that's how you do gender, and you have to do it appropriately according to culture to be seen as a real male or a real female. And so, I say here, he's a man, but he doesn't act like one. So the idea would be, maybe biologically you could tell by watching the videos that I am a male. But if I was, very, emotional, if I was always cowering, if I was very kind of quiet, you would kind of say, he's a guy, but he really doesn't act like one. Because those three traits I just talked about are traits that we don't associate with masculinity, we don't associate with maleness. So there's kind of that distinction we're getting at. Yeah, he's a guy, one sex, but he doesn't act like one, one's gender. And you have to give that proper action to people to see you kind of as a real male or female. Thus, gender itself becomes an achievement in addition to something that you simply perform. So, in this chapter that you read for today's class, basically it captures that socialization process. How gender is not inborn, it's not innate, and you have to learn the meanings we associate with the sexes through socialization. And sometimes you learn these meanings directly. Basically, boys aren't supposed to cry. Girls aren't supposed to be tough, and sometimes it's more indirectly, where nobody's really telling you kind of what to do or not to do, but still you get the message. And I remember one time uh, we had to take a home economics class in junior high, and my best friend Eric, probably the smartest guy I know, um, he was a little stupid this day though. He took out. We were making cookies in class, and he took out the cookie sheet, and he forgot to put on the glove, and so he took it out. And, a second later, he throws up the cookie sheet, and all cookies go flying in the air. But our teacher, I remember, she told Eric that, oh, don't worry about it. Guys aren't supposed to know how to bake, which is just kind of silly. But again, it's this kind of indirect socialization where you kind of, okay, yeah, guys aren't supposed to know how to cook, and girls are. And so you start to learn these things over time. And in the book, in the chapter, they talk about different agents of socialization. And here, just they try to get specific about who's doing socializing in terms of, who is gendering the person. And this, gendering, it starts, sometimes, before you're even born. The parent, learns the sex of or a future child, and then they paint that kid's room accordingly to gender expectations. Boys' room is blue, girls' room is pink or purple, and you divide the clothing colors, accordingly as well. So we do start to gender people before they're even born, but sometimes it gets a little bit more significant as kids get older. So in other words, when kids are really young, typically we treat them like kids. We want to keep them safe, you want to keep them happy. But as kids start to get older, and especially as they start to get close to formal education, going to preschool or kindergarten for the first time, here, studies show that parents really start to gender their kids. So they don't treat them simply like kids anymore. They start to treat them like boys and girls. So, a parent can be an agent of socialization when they're no longer treating you like their child, but their son or their daughter, and kind of gendering you as such. It can be a brother, it can be a sister, it can be friends, classmates. They can be these agents of socialization that kind of impose these gendered expectations on you and socialize you as a result. Sometimes you can learn it by observation. This is what we call the vicarious learning, where nobody's kind of teaching you directly or indirectly, but you simply observe it, whether it be by watching television and how you see women or men acting and not acting, on television when they're making fun of guys, when they're making fun of girls, so to kind of stay away from those activities. Or to simply, again, anywhere out and about, you can observe people being treated as men and women rather than being treated as people, and you start to learn the rules of the game as a result. So once you learn these rules of the game, you start to perform these gender expectations, and you perform them by kind of displaying the femininity and by displaying the masculinity, clothing you wear, how you style your hair, your overall just kind of approach you take. Do you try to be stoic? Do you try to embrace others? And so again, it's something that can be fluid. It doesn't mean just because you're stoic, in school, doesn't mean you can't embrace family members when you're home. But sometimes this performance that you give publicly typically ties into the expectations you're supposed to give. But sometimes in more private lives, you can display different meanings. You can do different activities that are not necessarily associated with being a male or being a female. And this, before I move on, is a story about kind of a parent gendering children. When I was younger with my sister, who's a few years older than me. We would, like a lot of siblings do, we would roughhouse, we would fight, not fight, with a capital F, but, fight around, mess around a little bit. And we would do this. And I remember, kind of one time my mom uh, said to my sister, Allison, girls don't, hit, girls don't fight. And so it was weird because, yeah, they do. We've been doing this for years now. But all of a sudden, again, my sister was getting to a certain age where being physical in that manner is seen as unladylike. So although she can be physical, she could fight as a girl, she wasn't supposed to. So that's kind of a moment of gendering going on by my mom that I recall. So we can also say that in these gender performances, we have reward punishment systems. So the chapter gets into this as well, and mostly focusing on younger individuals. But still, we see this as you get older, in high school, the systems in place. And again, the system will kind of change from one context to another. Some people will police other people more than others. But nevertheless, here we start to see there's a social policing going on where other people are kind of giving you rewards or punishing you based upon if you're giving the expected gender performances. So, when guys are seen as acting like guys, and they're rewarded in the sense that sometimes they're elevated to a higher status. So, if the guys really seem to be, cool school, and if he's, really good at sports, tough, he's kind of elevated as being, the man. But, even if you're not kind of living up to or going above the expectations of masculinity, if you're still seen as kind of a real guy, you're treated normally. And sometimes when people just treat you normally, you don't see that as a reward, but just ask those people who are treated abnormally. A lot of those people who are treated abnormally would do anything to be treated normal. Being treated normal is definitely a reward compared to the alternative, where other people can kind of punish you and give these kind of social sanctions in a sense. Often it's through verbal means. They'll make fun of you. They'll treat you kind of negatively, usually just through conversation. But sometimes it can be more social in nature, in the sense that they can marginalize you. They exclude you from group activities. They don't include you as one in the group. So here's when you give the proper gender performances, people reward you in the sense that you are treated as normal. When you're seen as the man, or maybe the prettiest girl in school, sometimes you're elevated to a higher status. And when you don't kind of live up to those expectations of femininity or masculinity, people kind of punish you, verbally through jokes and through kind of saying mean things to you, but sometimes socially when they marginalize you and they exclude you as well. But the same type of policing that you see socially speaking often occurs on the personal level as well. Studies have shown when people, especially younger people, when they live up to gender expectations, they personally have higher levels of self-worth. They see themselves as normal, and that's much better for one's kind of mental health status, one's kind of psychological state. On the other hand, when you kind of are treated and you don't see yourself as being normal in terms of your gender, often that can lead to feelings of shame. You feel ashamed that you're not one way and you're expected to be, and that can lead to feelings of lower self-worth. And again, these things can change over time, just like these social reward systems can change, and the self-reward systems can change. People as they get older typically, do feel kind of more at ease with who they are in terms of their real self compared to how they're expected to be in the minds of other people. But nevertheless, especially at younger ages, you can see all this going on. And again, it has real consequences in terms of mental health, in terms of one's ability to kind of go through school properly, by finishing, getting good grades and all that. So one thing that ties into this is the concept of border work. They talk about border work in the chapter. So I just wanted to bring it up quickly here. Basically, it's when you kind of socially speaking, other people are imposing the gender expectations on other people. So rather than, for an example, treating your students like students, you start to treat your students as boys and as girls. And you see this all the time where you divide people up into different groups, based upon one sex. So you're no longer treating students as students, but you're treating students as boys and as girls. And so that's what we're kind of looking at in terms of the reward system embedded in gender performances, and often the kind of border work that's involved in terms of allocating the punishments and getting the system and rewarding people at the same time. So finally here, I want to touch on that fourth in-class assignment. And basically, it touches on a lot of these key points of recognizing gender as something that we do, something we perform. So specifically, I want you to look at kind of shared biological properties. So basically, kind of parts of ourselves, our bodies, and parts of our bodies that all people have to one degree or another. There's differences among women and among men, and differences maybe between the sexes as well. But nevertheless, these are properties of people. And what I want you to look at is how we treat these biological properties, these similarities that all people have. We treat these differently according to one's sex. And so as a result, we create these differences between women and men, between boys and girls, differences that do not initially exist. So we are creating gender differences by performing the expectations imposed upon us. So in the example, I talk about leg hair. So all people, to various degrees, some men have hairier legs than others, and same thing for women, but all people have, leg hair. And if we treated that biological similarity the same way with all people, with women and men, then our legs will look more similar than different. So, if we were in class and everybody, didn't shave their legs for, 2 weeks, you want to be able to tell if the person was a woman or a man just by looking at their legs. And likewise, if everybody in our class kind of shaved their legs, we could look at legs, but we couldn't use those shaved legs to distinguish one sex from the other. But as long as we say, girls are supposed to shave their legs, women are supposed to, and guys are not, what we do is kind of disrupt that biological similarity and create a social difference, and a social difference that is used to distinguish women and femininity from men and masculinity. So that's what I want you to do, is kind of come up with 3 examples, whether it be, talking about hair we have all over our bodies in different places, how we treat our bodies in terms of how we work out, how we decorate our bodies in terms of jewelry, piercings, tattooing, or how we dress our bodies, how we fashion our hair. So just kind of, take a similarity that we have and kind of recognize how we create a social difference through, working out differently, or through dressing differently, or doing different piercings according to how you're supposed to do all those things if you're a guy or if you're a girl. So come up with 3 examples of how we make, the biological social. And then in general, why do people perform these practices? Why do we do this? Why does one sex typically shave their legs and the other one doesn't? Why does one sex typically, for example, shave their armpits, but the other one doesn't? So that's what I'm looking for that assignment. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. And we'll leave that there for today. And then for our next class, what we'll do is get into 2 subtopics at once. We're going to be looking at social class and race. And those 2 subtopics we're going to look at in reference to our first book of the semester, LaRose, Unequal Childhoods.